The world is teetering on the edge of disaster as mass formation and the rise of totalitarianism has gone global. Yet this crisis may be avoidable, according to Mattias Desmet, a leading expert on mass formation. Mattias Desmet is author of the Psychology of Totalitarianism. He is a professor of clinical psychology at Ghent University in Belgium, and he's also a practicing psychoanalytic psychotherapist. We discuss what mass formation is, how it develops, and how the world can avoid a repeat of its historical consequences. Hey, Mattias Desmet, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Thank you for inviting me, Josh.
You know, the phrase mass formation psychosis has kind of become very well known very recently, thanks to Joe Rogan and some of his interviews. I understand you were the guy who kind of framed the whole thing in the beginning. You did your book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, where you kind of warn about these issues we're seeing now with the lockdowns and mask mandates and really the outgrowth of totalitarianism. But what you show is that maybe this was almost an expected maybe development of a problem that's been running a long time. Can you kind of explain, I guess, first of all, let's go into what is mass formation psychosis?
Yeah, I always use the term mass formation because mass formation psychosis, if you use the term psychosis, it refers to individual psychiatric diagnostics, and it can, both at the intellectual, the strategical, and the ethical level, have some effects that I think are not very good, and it can be stigmatizing. In an intellectual, from an intellectual perspective, it's always a little bit problematic, I think, to use a term that is used for individual diagnostics at the group level, and at the level of the strategical level. I think it's often better to use a more neutral term, because if you use a more stigmatizing and labeling term, then the people whom you speak about might react in a defensive way, and it might be more difficult and harder for them to accept your message. So that's just my 2-cent worth opinion about the use of the term mass formation or mass formation psychosis. As to the question what mass formation is, mass formation is a specific kind of group formation which has very specific effects at the level of individual psychological functioning, such as when people are in a grip of a mass formation, they lose every capacity to take a critical distance of what the group believes in. That's one major characteristic of the effect and mass formation has at the level of at the individual level. And then, this can go quite far. People in a mass formation, in the end, start to believe the most absurd things. To give you only one example, I had a conversation with a woman of Iran, Shoreh Feshtali, who lived in Iran during the revolution in 1979, and she told me that people started to believe there that the Ayatollah, whom they considered their leader, to be the leader of the masses, how the Ayatollah, how people started to believe that the picture of the Ayatollah was printed on the surface of the moon. And when there was a full moon in the sky, people typically stood out were in the streets pointing at the moon, showing each other where exactly they could see the portrait of the Ayatollah. So that's to give you only one example of how absurd the beliefs can be where the masses start to believe in. And I'm sure we can find similar examples during the corona crisis. Also there we saw a lot of absurd things, which were so absurd that it was almost incomprehensible that people bought into the narrative. So that's one thing about mass formation. The second thing is that when people are in the grip of a mass formation, they typically become willing to sacrifice everything that used to be important for them before the mass formation started. They even sacrifice the lives of their children and their own lives. It has always been like that. In the mass formations from ancient times, such as the Crusades and the witch hunts, and in the mass formation of modern times, such as the French Revolution or the large-scale mass formations in Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union. Every time the same was observed, people start to become willing to sacrifice everything that has individual importance. And then a third very important characteristic is that When people are in the grip of a mass formation, they become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. And in the end, in the ultimate stage of the mass formation, they will commit atrocities towards the people that do not go along with the masses. And they will do so, as if it is their ethical duty to do so. To refer to this woman again, Shoref Ishtali, who lived in Iran during the revolution, she said how she has seen with her own eyes how a mother reported her son to the state and how she hung the rope around his neck when he was on the scaffold, just before he was hung. And when he was hung, she claimed to be a heroine for doing what she did. That's typically the end stage of mass formation. So that's a phenomenological description of mass formation. But I think that what is crucial is to understand the process of mass formation, to understand the mechanism of mass formation, how it works. Because if you make the right analysis at that level, you will know what you have to do, and the people who defy the masses, who do not go along with the masses, will survive. If you make the wrong analysis, you will choose the wrong strategy, and the masses, there is a good chance that you will be destroyed by the masses. So that's why I wrote this book. That was one reason, just to make people aware of what the process of mass formation is, how it works, what makes it so dangerous, and what position you should take when you are confronted with it.
Yeah, well, I want to go into what we can do about it, but what signs do you see that we're in the process right now of a type of mass formation? What are the kind of writings on the wall you're seeing?
Oh well, before the Corona crisis, there was already what Jacques Ellul, someone who wrote about propaganda and also about mass manipulation and mass formation. Before the Corona crisis, let's say roughly. From 9/11 onwards, there was already a process of what Jacques Ellul calls massification, which is like a preliminary stage of mass formation, which is not a real mass formation yet, but which shows already the characteristics of the formation of masses, the preparatory phases of mass formation. But in the Corona crisis was the moment where a real fully fledged phenomenon of mass formation emerged for the first time, and the essential characteristic of a real mass formation, of a fully fledged mass formation, is that two new groups emerge in a society. Two new groups, a mass and a group of people that do not go along with the masses.